The default, you're not supposed. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, sorry for the delay. Um, hi, Esling. Hi, Sika. Sika, stop bunking me. I had a tough day, okay? Hi, Pingo. Hi, Chicky. I hope you're both well. It's not that one we're supposed to hear. It's that one. But yes, I overslept a little bit. Because I have been exercising pretty much the whole day. And apparently exercising makes me tired. Mostly of life, but but yeah. Hi Mike, hi. Welcome in. Sorry for the delay. Cheeks, hi. I have been waiting for when the cheeks are streaming. Wow, Mike, wow. Okay. It was mostly because I wanted to see when you did my commission. I like watching people do my commissions. Ooh, that's fair. Please give me a heads up when you're starting mine. Why do people exercise? It's just tiring. Well, I'm neither fat or dead. And I'm okay healthy. So I don't see the need. Also, I have put nuggies in the air fryer because I'm a bit hungry. And people do not like me when I'm hungry for some reason. I don't know why. My bunny is actually cute with glasses. Look, guys. You're right, Earthling. You're right. And yes, I'm a bit tired because I just woke up like 20 minutes ago. Chapter 6. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Yeah, I was supposed to take like a quick nap, like 30 minutes, but my alarm didn't go off. At least not with sound. Um, so I kinda slept like an hour. It's only because of Earthling that I woke up. Because apparently I'm part of Earthling's routine. But it was no Orc chieftain or brigand that led the assault upon Gondor. The darkness was breaking too soon, before the date that his master had set for it. Fortune had betrayed him for the moment, and the world had turned against him. Victory was slipping from his grasp even as he stretched out his hand to seize it. But his arm was long. He was still in command, wielding great powers. King, Ringwraith, Lord of the Nazgul. He had many weapons. He left the gate and vanished. A friend. Theoden, king of the Mark, had reached the road from the gate to the river, and he turned towards the city that was now less than a mile distant. He slackened his speed a little, seeking new foes, and his knights came about him. And Dernhelm was with them. Ahead nearer the walls, Elfham's men were among the siege engines, hewing, slaying, driving the foes into the fire pits. Well, nigh all the northern half of the Pelennor was overrun, and their camps were blazing. Orcs were flying towards the river like herds before the hunters, and the Rohirrim went hither and thither, and at their will. But they had not yet overthrown the siege, nor won the gate. Many foes stood before it, and on the further half of the plain were other hosts still unfought. Southward beyond the road lay the main force of the Haradrim, and there their horsemen were gathered about the standard of the chieftain. And he looked out, and in the growing light he saw the banner of the king, and that it was far ahead of the battle with few men about it. Then he was filled with red wrath and shouted aloud, and displaying his standard, black serpent upon scarlet, he came against the white horse and the green with great press of men, and the drawing of scimitars of the Southrons was like a glitter of stars. Then Theoden was aware of him, and would not wait for his onset, but crying to Snowmane, he charged headlong to greet him. Great was the clash of the meeting, but the white fury of the Northmen burned the hotter, and more skilled was the knighthood with long spears and bitter. Fewer were they, but they clove through the Southrons like a firebolt in the forest. Right through the press drove Theoden's Thengel son, and his spear was shivered as he threw down the chieftain. Out swept his sword, and he spurred to the standard huge staff and bearer, and the black serpent foundered. Then all that was left unslain of the cavalry turned and fled away. Okay, I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna get my nuggies, and then I can continue. Back with nuggies. Sure, I think, sure. Mm. No, technically I said I'm back. So are you saying you're front? Okay. But lo, subtly in the midst of the glory of the king, his golden shield was dimmed. The morning was blotted from the sky, dark fell about him. Horses reared and screamed. Men cast from the saddle lay grovelling on the ground. To me, cried Theoden, up Eolingers. Fear no darkness, but Shadowmane, wild with terror, stood up on high, fighting with the air. And then with a great scream he crashed upon his side. A black dart had pierced him. The king fell beneath him. The great shadow descended like a falling cloud, and behold, it was a winged creature, if bird, then greater than all other birds, and it was naked. And neither quill nor feather did it bear, and its vast pinions were as webs of hide between horn fingers, and it stank. A creature of an older world maybe it was, whose kind, lingering in forgotten mountains cold beneath the moon, outstayed their day, and in hideous and in hideous ire bred this last untimely brood, apt to evil. And the Dark Lord took it, and nursed it with fell meats, until it grew beyond the measure of all other things that fly. And it gave it to his servant to be his steed. Down, down it came, and then folding its fingered webs, it gave a croaking cry, and settled upon the body of Snowmane, digging in its claws, stooping its long naked neck. Upon it sat a shape, black mantled, huge and threatening. A crown of steel he bore, but between rim and robe naught was there to see, save only a deadly gleam of eyes, the Lord of the Nazgul. To the air he had returned, summoning his steed ere the darkness failed, and now he was come again, bringing ruin, turning hope and to despair, and victory to death. A great black mace he wielded, but Theoden was not utterly forsaken. The knights of his house lay slain about him, or else mastered by the madness of their steeds were borne far away. Yet one stood there still, Dernhelm the young, faithful beyond fear, and he wept for he had loved his lord as a father. Right through the charge, Mary had been borne unharmed behind him, until the shadow came, and then Windfalla had thrown them in his terror, and now ran wild upon the plain. Mary crawled on all fours like a dazed beast, and such a horror was on him that he was blind and sick. Kingsman, Kingsman, his heart cried with him, you must stay by him. As a father you shall be with me, you said. But his will made no answer, and his body shook. He dared not open his eyes or look up. Then out of the blackness in his mind he thought that he heard Dernhelm speaking. Yet now the voice seemed strange, recalling some other voice that he had known. Begone, foul Dwimmerlig, Lord of Carrion, leave the dead in peace. A cold voice answered, come not between a Nazgul and his prey, or he will not slay thee in thy turn. He will bear thee away to the houses of Lamentian, beyond all darkness, where thy flesh shall be devoured, and thy shriveled mind be left naked to the lidless eye. A sword rang as it was drawn. Do what you will, but I will hinder it if I may. Hinder me, thou fool. No living man may hinder me. Then Mary heard all sounds in that hour the strangest. It seemed that Durnhild laughed, and the clear voice was like the ring of steel. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Eowyn am I, Eowyn's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone if you be not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him. The winged creature screamed at her, but the ring wraith made no answer and was silent, as if in sudden doubt. Very amazement for a moment conquered Mary's fear. He opened his eyes, and the blackness was lifted from them. There, some paces from him, sat the great beast, and all seemed dark about it, and above it loomed the Nazgul Lord, like a shadow of despair. A little to the left, facing them, stood she whom had called Durnhild. But the helm of her secrecy had fallen from her, and her bright hair, released from its bonds, gleamed with pale gold upon her shoulders. Her eyes, grey as the sea, were hard and fell, and yet tears were on her cheek. A sword was in her hand, and she raised her shield against the horror of the enemy's eyes. Eowyn it was, and Durnhelm also, for into Mary's mind flashed a memory of the face that he saw at the riding from Dunharrow, the face of one that goes seeking death, having no hope. Pity filled his heart, and great wonder, and suddenly the slow-kindled courage of his race awoke. He clenched his hand. She should not die, so fair, so desperate. At least she should not die alone, unaided. The face of the enemy was not turned towards him, but still he hardly dared to move, dreading lest the deadly eyes should fall on him. Slowly he began to crawl aside, but the black captain, in doubt and malice, intent upon the woman before him, heeded him no more than a worm in the mud. Suddenly the great beast beat its hideous wings, and the wind of them was foul. Again it leaped into the air, and then swiftly fell down upon Eowyn, shrieking, striking with beak and claw. She did not blench, maiden of the Rohirrim. Child of kings, slender but as a steel blade, fair yet terrible, a swift stroke she dealt, skilled and deadly. The outstretched neck she clove asunder, and the hewn head fell like a stone. Backward she sprang, as the huge shape crashed into ruin. Vast wings outspread, crumpled on the earth, with its fall of shadow passed away. A light fell about her, and her hair shone in the sunrise. Out of the wreck rose the Black Rider, tall and threatening, towering about her. With a cry of hatred that stung the very ears like venom, he let fall his mace. Her shield was shivered in many pieces, and her arm was broken. She stumbled to her knees. He bent over her like a cloud, and his eyes glittered. He raised his mace to kill, But suddenly he too stumbled forward with a cry of bitter pain, and his stroke went wide, driving into the ground. Mary's sword had stabbed him from behind, shearing through the black mantle, and passing up beneath the hauberk, had pierced the sinew behind his mighty knee. Eowyn, Eowyn, cried Mary, then tottering, struggling up with her last strength, she drove her sword between crown and mantle, as the great shoulders bowed before her. The sword broke, sparkling into many shards. The crown rolled away with a clang. Eowyn fell forward upon her fallen foe. But lo, the mantle and hauberk were empty. Shapeless they lay now on the ground, torn and tumbled, and a cry went up into the shuddering air, and faded to a shrill wailing, passing with the wind. A voice bodiless and thin that died, and was swallowed up, and was never heard again in that age of this world. Nucky. Thought I heard something. I probably didn't. Okay. And there stood Maria Duck, the hobbit in the midst of the slain, blinking like an owl in the daylight. For tears blinded him, and through a mist he looked on Eowyn's fair head as she lay and did not move. And he looked on the face of the king, fallen in the midst of his glory, for Snowmane in his agony had rolled away from him again. Yet he was the bane of his master. Then Mary stooped and lifted his little hand to kiss it. And lo, Theoden opened his eyes, and they were clear, and he spoke in a quiet voice through labored. Farewell, Master Hobildla, he said. My body is broken. I go to my father's, and even in their mighty company I shall not be ashamed. I felt the black serpent, a grim morn, and a glad day, and a golden sunset. Mary could not speak, but wept anew. Forgive me, Lord, he said at last, if I broke your command, and yet have done no more in your service than to weep at other parting. The old king smiled. Grieve not, it is forgiven. Great heart will not be denied. Live now in blessedness, and when you sit in peace with your pipe, think of me. I hate these things. For never now shall I sit with you in Meadowsalt as I promised, or listen to your herb lore. He closed his eyes, and Mary bowed beside him. Presently he spoke again. Where's Ilma? For my eyes darken, and I would see him ere I go. He must be king after me. And I would send word to Ewan. She would not have me leave her. And now I shall not see her again, dearer than daughter. You. Lord, Lord, began Mary brokenly. She is. But at that moment there was a great clamor, and all about them horns and trumpets were blowing. Mary looked round. He had forgotten the war, and all the world beside. And many hours it seemed since the king rode to his fall, though in truth it was only a little while. But now he saw that they were in danger, and being caught in the very midst of the great battle that would soon be joined. I checked, and I'm comfortable. Except the crying, of course. New forces of the enemy were hastening up the road from the river, and from under the walls came the legions of Morgul. And from the southward field came footmen of Harad with horsemen before them, and behind them rose the huge backs of the Mumakil with war towers upon them. But northward the white crest of Yuma led the great front of the Rohirrim, which had again gathered and marshalled, and out of the city came all the strength of men that was in it. And the silver swan of Dol Amroth was born in the van, driving the enemy from the gate. For a moment his thought flitted through Mary's mind. Where's Gandalf? Is he not here? Could he not have saved the king and Eowyn? But thereupon Eomer rode up in haste, and with him came the knights of the household that still lived and had now mastered the horses. They looked in wonder at the carcass of the felled beast that lay there, and their steeds would not go near. But Eomer leaped from the saddle, and grief and dismay fell upon him as he came to the king's side and stood there in silence. Then one of the knights took the king's banner from the hand of Gunnlaug, the banner bearer, who lay dead, and lifted it up. Slowly Theoden opened his eyes. Seeing the banner, he made a sign that it should be given to Eomer. Hail, King of the Mark, he said. Ride now to victory. Bid Eowyn farewell. And so he died. I knew not that Eowyn lay near him. And those who stood by wept, crying, Theoden King, Theoden King. But Eomer said to them, Mourn not overmuch. Mighty was the fallen, meet was his ending. When his mount is raised, women then shall sweep. War now calls us. Yet he himself wept as he spoke. Let his knights remain here, he said, and bear his body in honor from the field, lest the battle ride over it. Yeah, and all these other of the king's men that lie here. And he looked at the slain, recalling their names. Then suddenly he beheld his sister Eowyn as she lay, and he knew her. He stood a moment as a man who is pierced in the midst of a cry by an arrow through the heart, and then his face was deathly white, and a cold fury rose in him, so that all speech failed him for a while. A fey mood took him. Eowyn, Eowyn, he cried at last. Eowyn, how come you here? What madness or devilry is this? Death, 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 death take us all. Then without taking counsel, or waiting for the approach of the men of the city, he spurred headlong back to the front of the great host, and blew a horn, and cried aloud for the onset. Over the field rang his clear voice calling, Death, ride, ride to ruin and the world's ending. And with that the host began to move, but the Rohirrim sang no more. Death they cried in one voice, loud and terrible, and gathered speed like a great tide. That battle swept about the fallen king, and passed, roaring away southward. And still Meriadoc the Hobbit stood there blinking through his tears, and no one spoke to him. Indeed, no one seemed to heed him. He brushed away the tears, and stooped to pick up the green shield that Eowyn had given to him, and he slung it at his back. Then he looked for his sword that he had let fall, for even as he struck his blow his arm was numbed, and now he could only use his left hand. And behold, there lay his weapon, but the blade was smoking like a dry branch that has been thrust into fire. And as he watched it, it writhed and withered and was consumed. So passed the sword of the Barrow Downs, work of Westerners. But glad would he have been to know its fate, who wrought it slowly long ago in the North Kingdom, when the Dunedain was young, and chief among the foes was the dread realm of Angmar and its sorcerer king. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. Men now raised the king, and laying cloaks upon spear truncheons, they made shift to bear him away towards the city, and others lifted Eowyn gently up and bore her after him. But the men of the king's household they could not yet bring from the field, for 7 of the king's knights had fallen there, and Eowyn the chief was among them. So they laid them apart from the foes and the fell beasts, and set spears about them. And afterwards, when all was over, men returned and made a fire there, and burned the carcasses of the beasts. But for Snowmain they dug a grave, and set up a stone, upon which was carved in the tongues of Gondor and the mark: faithful servant, yet master's bane, Lightfoot's foal, swift Snowmain. Green and long grew the grass on Snowman's hoof, something. But ever black and bare was the ground where the beast was burned. Now slowly and sadly Merry walked beside the bearers, and he gave no more heed to the battle. He was weary and full of pain, and his limbs trembled as with a chill. A great rain came out of the sea, and it seemed that all things wept for Theoden and Eowyn, quenching the fires in the city with great tears. It was through a mist that presently he saw the van of the men of Gondor approaching Imrahil, prince of Dol Amroth, rode up and drew rein before them. "What burden do you bear, men of Rohan?" he cried. "Theoden king," they answered. "He is dead. But Eomer king now rides in the battle. He with the white crest in the wind." Then the prince went from his horse and knelt by the bier in honor of the king and his great onset. And he wept, and rising he looked then on Eowyn and was amazed. "Surely here is a woman," he said. "Have even the women of the Rohirrim come to war in our need?" "Nay, only one," they answered. "The Lady Eowyn is she, sister of Eomer, and we knew naught of her writing until this hour, and greatly bereaved." Then the prince, seeing her beauty, though her face was pale and cold, touched her hand as he bent to look more closely on her. "Men of Rohan," he cried, "are there no leeches among you? She is hurt to the death maybe, but I deem that she yet lives." And he held the bright burnished vambrace that was upon his arm before her cold lips, and behold, a little mist was laid on the hardly to be seen. "Haste is now needed," he said, and he sent one riding back swiftly to the city to bring aid. But he, bowing low to the fallen, bade them farewell, and mounting rode away into battle. Oh, sometimes I hate crying. Oh. And now the fighting waxed furious on the fields of the Pelennor, and the dins of arms rose upon high, with the crying of men and the neighing of horses. Horns were blown, and trumpets were braying, and the Mumakil was bellowing as they goaded to war. Under the south walls of the city, the footmen of Gondor now drove against the legions of Morgul that were still gathered there in strength. But the horsemen rode eastward to the succor of Eomer, Hurin the Tall, Warden of the Keys, and the Lord of Lossarnoch, and Herlin of the Green Hills, and Prince Imrahil the Fair with his knights about him. Not too soon came their aid to the Rohirrim, for fortune had turned against Eomer, and his fury had betrayed him. The great wrath of his onset had utterly overthrown the front of his enemies, and great wedges of his riders had passed clear through the ranks of the Southrons, discomfiting their horsemen and riding their footmen to ruin. But wherever the Mumakil came, there the horses would not go, but blinched and swerved away, and the great monsters were unfought and stood like towers of defense. And the Haradrim rallied about them. And if the Rohirrim at their onset were thrice outnumbered by the Haradrim alone, soon their case became worse, for new strength came now streaming to the field out of Osgiliath. There they had been mustered for the sack of the city and the rape of Gondor, waiting on the call of the captain. He now was destroyed, but the Gothmog, lieutenant of Morgul, had flung them into fray, Easterlings with axes, and Varigs with cant, Southers in scarlet, and out of Far Harad, black men like half-trolls with white eyes and red tongues. Some now hastened up behind the Rohirrim. Others held westward to hold off the forces of Gondor and prevent their joining with Rohan. It was even as the day thus began to turn against Gondor, and their hope wavered, that a new cry went up in the city, it being then mid-morning, and the great wind blowing, and the rain flying north, and the sun shining. In that clear air, watchmen on the walls saw afar a new sight of fear, and their last hope left them. For Anduin from the bend at the Harland so flowed that from the city men could look down it lengthwise for some leagues, and the far-sighted could see any ships that approached. And looking thither, they cried in dismay, for black against the glittering stream they beheld a fleet borne up under the wind, drow-mounts and ship of great draught, with many oars, and with black sails bellying in the breeze. The corsairs of Umbar, men shouted. The corsairs of Umbar! Look, the corsairs of Umbar are coming! So Belfalas is taken, and the Ether and Lebanon is gone. The Corsairs are upon us. It is the last stroke of doom, and some without order, for none could be found to command them in the city, ran to the bells and tolled the alarm, and some blew the trumpets sounding the retreat. Back to the walls, they cried. Back to the walls. Come back to the city before all are overwhelmed. But the wind that sped the ships blew all their clamor away. The Rohirrim indeed had no need of the news or alarm. All too well they could see for themselves the black sails, for Ilme was now scarcely a mile from the Harland, and the great press of his first foes was between him and the haven there, while new foes came swirling behind, cutting him off from the prince. Now he looked to the river, and hope died in his heart, and the wind that he had blessed he now called accursed. But the hosts of Mordor were enheartened, and filled with a new lust and fury. They came yelling to the onset. Hmm. Stern now was Eomer's mood, and his mind clear again. He let blow the horns to rally all his men to his banner, that could come neither, for he thought to make a great shield wall at the last, and stand and fight there on foot till all fell, and do deeds of song on the fields of the Pelennor, though no man should be left in the west to remember the last king of the Mark. Hi, Sodrak. Hi. So he rode to a green hillock, and there set his banner, and the white horse ran rippling in the wind. Out of doubt, out of dark, to the day's rising, I came singing in the sun, sword unsheathing. To hope's end I rode, and to heart's breaking. Now for wrath, now for ruin, and a red nightfall. These staves he spoke, yet he laughed as he said them. For once more lust of battle was on him, and he was still unscathed, and he was young, and he was king, the lord of of a fell people. And lo, even as he laughed at despair, he looked out again on the black ships, and he lifted up his sword to defy them. And then wonder took him, and a great joy, and he cast his sword up in the sunlight, and sang as he recorded. And all eyes followed his gaze, and behold, upon the foremost ship a great standard bloke, and the wind displayed it as she would turn towards the Harland. There flowered a white tree, and that was for Gondor, but 7 stars were about it, and a high crown above it, the signs of Elendil that no lord had borne for years beyond count. And the stars flamed in the sunlight, for they were wrought of gems by Arwen's daughter of Elrond. And the crown was bright in the morning, for it was wrought of mithril and gold. And then we take a break. Isn't the app starting, or am I just gone? Are we back now? Or are we still gone? Are we here? I hope we are. Awesome. And hi, Leo. Welcome in. Nice to see you today. Okay, where did we get to? We got to there. These staves he spoke, yet he laughed as he said them. For once more lust of battle was on him. Haven't I fucking read that. Thus came Aragorn, son of Arathon, Elisar, Isildur's heir, Isildur's heir, out of the paths of the death, borne upon a wind from the sea, to the king of Gondor, and the mirth of the Rohirrim was a torrent of laughter and the flashes of swords, and the joy and wonder of the city was a music of trumpets and the ringing of bells. But the host of Mordor were seized with bewilderment, and a great wizardry it seemed to them that their own ships should be filled with their foes. And a black dread fell on them, knowing that the tides of fate had turned against them, and that doom was at hand. East rode the knights of Dol Amroth, driving the enemy before them, trollmen and variags and orcs that hated the sunlight. South strode Ilmer, and men fled before his face, and they were caught between the hammer and the anvil. For now men leaped from the ships to the quays of the Harland and swept north like a storm. There came Legolas, and Gimli wielding his axe, and Halbarad with the standard of Elladan and Elrohir, with stars on their bows, with stars on the brow, and the dour-handed Dunedain, rangers of the north, leading a great valor of the folk of Lebanon and Lamadon and the fiefs of the south. But before all went Aragorn with the flame of the west and Anduril, like a new fire kindled, Narsil reforged, as deadly as of old, and upon his brow was the star of Elendil. And so at length Ilmer and Aragorn met in the midst of the battle, and they leaned on their swords and looked on one another and were glad. Hi Lisa, hi. Jin Jin. The little Jin Jin. thus we meet again. Though all the host of Mordor lay between us, said Aragorn. Did I not say so at the Hornburg? So you spoke, said Eomer, but hope of the deceased. And I knew not then that you were a man foresighted. Yet twice blessed is help unlooked for, and never was a meeting of friends more joyful, and they clasped the hand in hand, nor indeed more timely, said Eomer. You come none too soon, my friend. Much loss and sorrow has befallen us. Then let us avenge it, ere we speak of it, said Aragorn, and rode back to battle together. Hard fighting and long labor that had still, for the Southron were bold men and grim, and fierce in despair, and the Easterlings were strong and war-hardened, and asked for no quarter. And so in this place and that, by burnt homestead or barn, upon hillock or mound, on the wall or on field, still they gathered and rallied and fought until the day wore away. Then the sun went at last behind Mindulin, and filled all the sky with a great burning, so that the hills and the mountains were dyed as with blood. Fire glowed in the river, and the grass of the Pelennor lay red in the nightfall. And in that hour the great battle of the field of Gondor was over, and not one living foe was left within the circuit of the Rammers. All were slain, save those who fled to die, or to drown in the red foam of the river. Few ever came eastward to Morgul or Mordor, and to the land of the Huradrim came only a tale far off, a rumor of the wrath and terror of Gondor. Aragorn and Eomer and Imrahil rode back towards the gate of the city, and they were now weary beyond joy or sorrow. These three were unscathed, for such was their fortune, and the skill and might of their arms. And few indeed had dared to abide them, or look on their faces in the hour of their wrath. But many others were hurt, or maimed, or dead on the field. The axes hewed for long, as he fought alone and unhorsed, and both Dulin of Morthond and his brother and were trampled to death when they assailed the Mumakil, leading their bowmen close to shoot at the eyes of the monsters. Neither Hurlan the fair would return to Pinaskelin, nor Grimbold to Grimshade, nor Halberad to the Northlands, dour-handed ranger. No few had fallen, renowned or nameless, captain or soldier, for it was a great battle, and the full count of it no tale was told. So long afterward, a maker in Rohan said in his song of the mounds of Munburg, we heard of the horns in the hills ringing, the swords shining in the south kingdom. Steeds went striding to the stoning land, as wind in the morning. War was kindled, their Theoden fell, Thengling mightily, to his golden halls, and green pastures in the northern fields never returning. High Lord of the host, Harding and Guthlaf, Dunhir and Duin, doughty Grimbold. Herfara and Hildebrand, Horn and Fastred, fought and fell there in a far country. In the mounds of Munburg, on the mold they lie with the league fellows, lords of Gondor. neither hill on the fair to the hills by the sea, nor following the old to the flowering vales ever, to Anak to his own country, returned in triumph, nor the tall bowmen, Berofin and Duilin, to the dark waters, meres of Morthond, on the mountain shadows. Death in the morning, at day's ending, lords took and slow and lowly. Long now they sleep on the grass in Gondor, by the great river. Grey now as tears, gleaming silver, red then it rolled, roaring water. Foam dyed with blood, flamed at sunset, as beacons mountains burned at evening. Red fell the dew in Ramos Ichor. That was apparently the chapter for today. It was kinda short. But yes. Because I think meh, 10 pages. Yeah. Just because it's today, we're gonna take a chapter more because it's only 10 pages. Yeah, I didn't know it was that. Damn, Jen. I almost took my nail off my little toe today, so yeah. I hit a shoe and apparently my nail was caught in something, and then it said swoop, and I began to bleed. Yay! Leo do wanna pew pew with you. Okay. I do want to pew pew with you, but you're so far away. Yeah, but that's also why ping exists. So yes, we will continue with another chapter. Yeah, ping. How long it takes for the signal to go back and forth. You should have known that, Leo. I know who, but I can't say. So yes. Chapter 7, The Pyre of Denethor. When the dark shadow of the gate withdrew, Gandalf still sat motionless, but Pippin rose to his feet, as if a great weight had been lifted from him, and he stood listening to the horns, and it seemed to him that they would break his heart with joy. And never in the after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes. But now suddenly his errand returned to his memory, and he ran forward. At that moment Gandalf stirred up and spoke to Shadowfax, and was about to ride through the gate. Gandalf, Gandalf, cried Pippin, and Shadowfax halted. What are you doing here? Said Gandalf. It is not a law in the city that those who wear the black and silver must stay in the citadel unless their lord gives them leave. He has, said Pippin. He sent me away, but I'm frightened. Something terrible may happen up there. The lord is out of his mind. I'm afraid he will kill himself and kill Faramir too. Can't you do something? Gandalf looked through the gaping gate, and already on the fields he heard the gathering sound of battle. He clenched his hand. I must go, he said. The Black Rider is abroad, and he will yet bring ruin on us. I have no time. But Faramir, cried the Pippin, he is not dead, and they will burn him alive if someone does not stop them. Burn him alive, said Gandalf. What is this tale? Be quick. Well, that makes sense. It actually makes sense, then. Denethor has gone to the tomb, said Pippin, and he has taken Faramir, and he says we are all to burn, and he will not wait. And they are to make a pyre and burn him on it, and Faramir as well. And he sent men to fetch wood and oil, and I have told Beregond, but I'm afraid he won't dare. Dare to leave his post. He is on guard, and what can he do anyway? So Pippin poured out his tale, reaching up and touching Gandalf's knee with trembling hands. Can't you save Faramir? Maybe I can, said Gandalf, but if I do, then others will die, I fear. Well, I must come, since no other help can reach him, but evil and sorrow will come of this. Even in the heart of the stronghold, the enemy has power to strike us, for his will it is that is at work. Then, having made up his mind, he acted swiftly, and catching up Pippin and setting him before him, he turned Shadowfax with a word. Up the climbing streets of Minas Tirith they clattered, while the noise of war rose behind them. Everywhere men were rising from the despair and dread, seizing their weapons, crying one to another, Rohan has come! Captains were shouting, companies were mustering, many already were marching down to the gate. They met the Prince Imrahil, and he called to them, Whither now, Mithrandir? They will hear him of fighting on the fields of Gondor. We must gather all the strength that we can find. You will need every man and more, said Gandalf. Make all haste. I will come when I can. But I have an errand to the Lord Denethor that will not wait. Take command in the Lord's absence. They passed on, and as they climbed and drew near to the citadel, they felt the wind blowing in their faces, and they caught the glimmer of morning far away. A light growing in the southern sky, but it brought little hope to them, not knowing what evil lay before them, fearing to come too late. Darkness is passing, said Gandalf, but it still lies heavy on the city. At the gate of the citadel they found no guard. Then Beregond was gone, said Pippin more hopefully. They turned away and hastened along the road to the closed door. It stood wide open, and the porter lay before it. He was slain, and his key had been taken. Work of the enemy, said Gandalf. Such deeds he loves. Friend at war with friend. Loyalty divided in confusion of hearts. Now he dismounted and bade Shadowfax return to his stable. For my friend, he said, you and I should have ridden to the fields long ago. But other matters delay me. Yet come swiftly if I call. They passed the door and walked down the steep winding road. Light was growing, and the tall columns of carven figures beside the way went slowly like great ghosts. Suddenly the silence was broken, and they heard below them cries and ringing of swords, such sounds as had not been heard in the hallowed places since the building of the city. At last they came to Rathdin Inn, and hastened towards the house of the stewards, looming in the twilight under its great dome. Stay, stay, cried Gandalf, springing forward to the stone stairs before the door. Stay this madness. For there were servants of Denethor with swords and torches in their hands. But alone in the porch upon the topmost step stood Beregond, clad in the black and silver of the guard, and he held the door against them. Two of them had already fallen to his sword, staining their hallows with their blood, and the others cursed him, calling him outlaw and traitor to his master. Even as Gandalf and Pippin ran forward, they heard from within the house of the dead the voice of Denethor crying, Haste, haste, do as I have bidden. Slay me this renegade, or must I do so myself? There upon the door, which Beregond held shut with his left hand, was wrenched open, and there behind him stood the lord of the city, tall and fell, and a light like a flame was in his eyes, and he held a drawn sword. But Gandalf sprang up the steps, and the men fell back from him and covered their eyes, for his coming was like the coming of a white light into a dark place, and he came with great anger. He lifted up his hand, and in the very stroke the sword of Denethor flew up and left his grasp and fell behind him in the shadows of the house, and Denethor stepped backward before Gandalf as one amazed. What is this, my lord? Said the wizard. The houses of the dead are no places for the living, and why do men fight here in the hallows when there is war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy come even to Rathdin Inn? Since when has the Lord of Gondor been answerable to thee, said Denethor, or may I not command my own servants? You may, said Gandalf, but others may contest your will, when it is turned to madness and evil. Where is your son Faramir? He lies within, said Denethor, burning, already burning. They have set a fire in his flesh, but soon all shall be burned. The west has failed. It shall all go up in great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash, ash and smoke blown away on the wind. Then Gandalf, seeing the madness that was on him, feared that he had already done some evil deed, and he thrust forward with Beregond and Pippin behind him, while Denethor gave back until he stood beside the table within. But there they found Faramir, still dreaming in his fever, lying upon the table. Wood was piled under it, and high all about it, and all was drenched with oil. Even the garments of Faramir, and the coverlets. But as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. Then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hid in him, even as the light of the power was hidden under his grey mantle. He leaped up onto his faggots, and bore him towards the door. But as he did, so Faramir moaned, and called on his father in his dream. Denethor started as at waking up from a trance, and the flame died in his eyes, and he wept, and he said, "Do not take my son from me. He calls for me." "He calls," said Gandalf, "but you cannot come to him yet, for he must seek healing on the threshold of death, and maybe find it not. Whereas your part is to go out to the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you." "This you know in your heart. He will not wake again," said Denethor. "Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side?" "Authority is not given to you, steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death," answered Gandalf, "and only the heathen kings, under the domination of the Dark Power, did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death." Then passing through the door, he took Faramir from the deadly house, and laid him on the bier on which he had been brought, and which had now been set in the porch. Denethor followed him, and stood trembling, looking with longing on the face of his son, and for a moment, while all was silent and still, watching the lord of his throes, he wavered. "Come," said Gandalf, "we are needed. There is much that you can yet do." Then suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from the pillow on which his head had lain. Then coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo, he had between his hands a palantir. And as he held it up, it seemed to those that looked on that the globe began to glow with an inner flame, so that the lean face of the Lord was lit as with a red fire, and it seemed cut out of hard stone, sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. His eyes glittered. "Pride and despair," he cried. "Didst thou think that the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, great fool, for thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labor in healing. Go forth and fight. Vanity. For a little space you may triumph on the field, for a day, but against the power that now arises, there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of his hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving, and even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee and wafts of Anduin a fleet with black mm, with black sails. The West has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves. Such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed, said Gandalf. Hope on then, laughed Denethor. Do I not know thee, Mithrandir? Thy hope is to rule in my stead, to stand behind every throne, north, south, or west. I have read thy mind and its policies. Do I not know that this halfling was commanded by thee to keep silence? That he was brought hither to be a spy within my very chamber? And yet in our speech together I have learned the names and purposes of all thy companions. So with the left hand thou wouldst use me for a little while as a shield against Mordor, and with the right bring up this ranger of the north to supplicant me. But I say to thee, Gandalf Mithrandir, I will not be thy tool. I am steward of the house of Anarion. I will not step down to be the dotard chamberlain of an upstart, even were his claim proved to me. Still he comes but of line of Isildur. I will not bow to such a one. Dust of a ragged house, long bereft of lordship and dignity. They are. What then would you have, said Gandalf, if your will could have its way? I would have things as they were in the days of my life, answered Denethor, and in the days of my long fathers before me. To be the lord of the city in peace. And leave my chair to a son after me, who will be his own master, and no wizard's pupil. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated. Mm. To me it would seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor, said Gandalf. And at the least you shall not rob the son of his choice, while his death is still in doubt. At those words Denethor's eye flamed again, and taking the stone under his arm, he drew a knife and strode towards the bier. But Beregond sprang forward and set himself before Faramir. So, cried Denethor, thou hast already stolen half my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, so that they rob me wholly of my son at the last. But in this at least thou shalt not defy my will, to rule my own end. Come hither, he cried to his servants. Come if you are not all recreant. The two of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched a torch from the hand of one and sprang back into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there, wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet, and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to another purpose, he saw only two-edged hands withering in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of a fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men. So passes Denethor, son of Eclithian, said Gandalf. Then he turned to Beregond and the Lord's servants that stood there aghast. And so pass also the days of Gondor that you have known, for good or evil they are ended. Ill deeds have been done here, but let now all enmity that lies between you be put away, for it was contrived by the enemy, and works his will. You have been caught in a net of varying duties that you did not weave. But think, you servants of the Lord, blind in your obedience, that but for the treason of Beregond Faramir, captain of the White Tower, would now also be burned. Bear away from this unhappy place your comrades who have fallen, and we will bear Faramir, steward of Gondor, to a place where he can sleep in peace, or die if that be his doom. Then Gandalf and Beregond, taking up the bier, bore it away towards the houses of healing, while behind them walked Pippin with downcast head. But the servants of the Lord stood gazing as stricken men at the house of the dead. And even as Gandalf came to the end of Thrasin, there was a great noise. Looking back, they saw the dome of the house crack and smokes issue forth, and then with a rush and rumble of stone it fell in a fury of fire. But still unabated, the flames danced and flickered among the ruins. Then in terror the servants fled and followed Gandalf. At length they came back to the steward's door, and Beregond looked with grief at the porter. This deed I shall ever rue, he said, but a madness of haste was on me, and he would not listen, but drew sword against me. Then taking the key that he had wrested from the slain man, he closed the door and locked it. This should now be given to the Lord Faramir, he said. The Prince of Dol Amroth is in command in the absence of the Lord, said Gandalf. But since he is not here, I must take this on myself. I bid you keep the key and guard it until the city is set in order again. Hi, Ike. Hi. Now at last they passed into the high circles of the city, and in the light of morning they went their way towards the houses of healing. And these were fair houses, set apart for the care of those who were grievously sick, but now they were prepared for the tending of men hurt in battle or dying. They stood not far from the citadel gate, in the sixth circle, nigh to its southward wall, and about them was a garden and a greensward with trees, the only such place in the city. There dwelt the few women that had been permitted to remain in Minas Tirith, since they were skilled in healing or in the service of the healers. That is true, Jen. I do not eat carrots. But even as Gandalf and his companions came carrying the beer to the main door of the houses, they heard a great cry that went up from the field before the gate, and rising shrill and piercing into the sky passed and died away on the wind. So terrible was the cry that for a moment all stood still. And yet, when it had passed, suddenly their hearts were lifted up in such a hope as they had not known since the darkness came out of the east, and it seemed to them that the light grew clear and the sun broke through the clouds. But Gandalf's face was grave and sad, and bidding Baragon and Pippin to take Faramir into the houses of healing, he went up onto the walls nearby, and there, like a figure carven in white, he stood in the new sun and looked out. And he beheld with the sight that was given to him all that had befallen. And when Ilma rode out from the forefront of his battle, and stood beside those who lay upon the field, he sighed, and he cast his cloak about him again, and went from the walls. And Baragon and Pippin found him standing in thought before the door of the houses when they came out. They looked at him, and for a while he was silent. At last he spoke, "My friends," he said, "and all you people of this city, and of the western lands. Things of great sorrow and renown have come to pass. Shall we weep or be glad? Beyond hope, the captain of our foes has been destroyed, and you have heard the echo of his last despair. But he has not gone without woe and bitter loss, and that I might have averted but for the madness of Denethor. So long has the reach of our enemy become. Alas, but now I perceive how his will was able to enter into the very heart of the city. Though the stewards deemed that it was a secret kept only by themselves, long ago I guessed that here in the White Tower, one at least of the 7 seeing stones was preserved. In the days of his wisdom, Denethor would not presume to use it to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength. But his wisdom failed, and I fear that the peril of his realm grew. He looked in the stone and was deceived. Far too often, I guess. Since Boromir departed, he was too great to be subdued to the will of the dark power. He saw none the less only those things which that power permitted him to see. The knowledge which he obtained was doubtless often of service to him, yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind. Now I understand what seemed so strange to me, said Pippin, shuddering at his memories as he spoke. The Lord went away from the room where Faramir lay, and it was only when he returned that I first thought he was changed, old and broken. It was in the very hour that Faramir was brought to the tower that many of us saw a strange light in the topmost chamber, said Beregond. But we have seen that light before, and it has long been rumored in the city that the Lord would at times wrestle in thought with his enemy. Alas, then I have guessed rightly, said Gandalf. Thus the will of Sauron entered into Minas Tirith, and thus I have been delayed here. And here I shall still be forced to remain, for I shall soon have other charges, not Faramir only. Now I must go down to meet those who come. I have been seen a sight upon the field that is very grievous to my heart, and greater sorrow may yet come to pass. Come with me, Pippin, but you, Beregond, should return to the citadel and tell the chief of the guard there what has befallen. It will be his duty, I fear, to restore you from the guard, but say to him that if I may give him counsel, you should be sent to the houses of healing, to be the guard and servant of your captain, and to be at his side when he awakes. If that shall ever be again. For by you he was saved from the fire. Go now, I shall return soon. With that he turned away, and went with Pippin down towards the lower city. And even as they hastened on their way, the wind brought a grey rain, and all the fires sank, and those arose a great smoke before them. So that was the last one of today. So now we will go and find someone to raid. If I can. So let's see. Does anyone have someone we can go and say hi to? Because right now I just have the usual things. Or the usual people. And I would like someone new. Ginny? Who's Ginny? Dana Games we rated, what was it, 3 times ago? I think it was 3 times ago. Yeah, unfortunately, Stina. Hi, Stina. Well, let's see. Yeah, Stina, do you have anyone we can raid? Yeah, that's fine. To be honest, I do not go very much for a category. I go more for the vibe of the stream. Eh. Let's see here. Paste plain text. That one. Yes, I will remember him for another time. That's great. Can I get some some rate messages, please? But today we are going to the question. Gathering all of the great viewers. Seems like my rates or my mods are a bit offline. So the top one if you're not a subscriber, the bottom one if you are. So let's go and say hi to this person. Call the question. Have a great night, everyone, and thank you for being here. Remember, next Sunday is the giveaway where you can win one of these mugs of your own choosing. But yes, I will see you all next Sunday. Hope to see a lot of you. Okay.